On today's show, one big, beautiful budget bill is now open for debate in the Senate after winning Saturday's procedural hurdle. Two more Republican moderates head for the exits. The messaging Democrats need to win. The race for mayor of New York City gets even uglier. Why throwing millions of Americans off Medicaid and food stamps is the Republican Party's latest iteration of voter suppression. And if there's time, I have some really disturbing artificial intelligence that I played with over the weekend. And I'm telling you, it's going to get us all killed. This is some really nasty artificial intelligence manipulating photos. I am not optimistic about the future. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman. Here in New York City, where between now and November, the fight is being waged for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. It's happening right here. So get used to the name Zohran Mamdani. He became a U.S. citizen roughly 7 years ago. He's a socialist who just said on Meet the Press, billionaires shouldn't exist. A proud Muslim in his early 30s, and he just won the Democratic nomination for mayor of New York, a city with the world's largest population of Jews. To paraphrase Michelle Goldberg, whose column in the New York Times is now my favorite, quote, "In New York City, we teach the rest of the world how to live with one another." That's basically what she said in her latest column. And I'll let you know what the secret is. She wouldn't tell you what the secret is. I'm going to tell you what the secret to New York is. How is it possible that they can throw millions of people onto this tiny island, millions of people with 1,000 different languages, 1,000 different religions, pigments, nationalities, sexualities, and smells, and yet the streets aren't littered with bodies thrown from the rooftops? What's the secret? 5 little words, and they are, get out of my face. Actually, 6 little words, but children may be watching right now. They knew what they were doing when they put the United Nations in New York City. Now, don't get me wrong, New York City is a horrible place to live. There are 8.5 million problems with New York City, and those 8.5 million problems are the people who live here. Nobody's happy in New York City. This isn't about happiness. It's about survival, our survival, and the survival of our neighbors. Get out of my face. Leave me alone, or I'm calling 911, either to have you arrested or get you an ambulance. That's how it works here in New York City. Don't talk to me unless you need an ambulance or I need to call the police on you. Get out of my face. I won't tell you how to live. You don't tell me how to live. And we'll all live unhappily ever after the way we're supposed to. All that being said, New York City is dying. The billionaires, Wall Street, are taking it all. And there's nothing left. There are a lot of frightened, hateful, and angry Democrats right now in this town who will do anything to keep Zohran Mamdani from becoming mayor. And this is why it's the epic battle for control of the Democratic Party. Control the Democratic Party in New York City and around this country. Democrats have reached an inflection point. Embrace Mamdani or die. Well, where am I? Here we go. Throwing millions of Americans off Medicaid and food stamps is the new Republican form of voter suppression. I truly believe this. People living at or below the poverty line are more likely to vote for Democrats, but they're also less likely to vote. So that's the only way I can explain why Republicans think this new budget bill is good politics. Pew Research said last year that 60% of registered voters living at or below the poverty line are Democrats. while 36% Republicans. So one would think this malignantly cruel budget bill would be good for Democrats. But the poorer Americans get, the less likely they are to vote. Partly because Republicans have spent the past decade passing legislation that makes it increasingly difficult for those at or below the poverty line to even get a ballot. Voter ID, closing polling stations, showing proof of residence, all of this places a disproportionate burden on the poor and makes them less likely to even try and vote. So, by throwing millions off food stamps, Medicaid, and Obamacare, you're making likely Democratic voters less likely to vote at all. I believe it is, in its own twisted way, a form of voter suppression. I'll circle back to this in a second because it raises serious questions for the Democratic leadership going into this week's Senate debate on the 2026 budget and how to win the 2026 midterms. For example, if poor people are less likely to vote and Republicans are creating millions of new poor people with this new budget, where will Democrats fish for votes? Now, when I think of the Democratic Party, I think Bobby Kennedy, the father, the good Bobby Kennedy, who toured Appalachia and drew focus to the swollen bellies of starving American children. But those kids, and we're learning their parents, don't vote, or at least the parents don't vote the way parents of children without swollen bellies tend to vote. When you're Obama, the Clintons, Biden, or Harris, you say, I'll raise money from Wall Street, get elected, and try to help those less fortunate by working with rather than against the richest 1%. But that's not enough. This economy doesn't work for half our country, which is why roughly half this country that can vote doesn't. The solution is what they have in Australia, mandatory voting. Every adult citizen over the age of 18 must vote. But that's never going to fly in America because our Supreme Court would rule that not voting is protected speech, or whatever they would need to say, whatever the Supreme Court would need to say in order to preserve this nation's proud tradition of gross inequality. So what do you do when you're part of the Democratic leadership? I mean, other than quit and turn the entire party over to Bernie and AOC. Short of that, what do you do if you're Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer? If poor people or Americans on the verge of becoming poor are less likely to vote, do you think you can win the midterms by promising them a stronger safety net, even if they're less likely to vote? Or do you do what Obama did, which was try to appeal to the rich and middle class's better angels through the painfully slow incrementalism of private-public partnerships whose modest success was far outweighed by the millions of Americans who were left behind and giving rise to Donald Trump? Or do you offer what Republicans are about to deliver in their 2026 budget, which is to say to Americans, folks, if you're poor, if you fear you're about to become poor, then vote for us, and we promise to make your neighbor even poorer than you are. The Republican Party is beyond redemption, and after the 2026 midterms, it will become a wholly owned and operated subsidiary of Donald Trump, if it already isn't. Over the weekend, two moderates who occasionally pretended to stand up to Trump, North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis and Nebraska Republican Don Bacon, both occasional thorns in Donald Trump's floppy, oleaginous side, they announced they will not seek re-election next year. Nebraska's Don Bacon repeatedly warned against the MAGA takeover, and he's especially gone after the pro-Putin wing of the Republican caucus. While Bacon said he had serious reservations about the House version of the 2026 budget bill, when push came to shove in late May of this year, he ended up voting for it. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who just announced his retirement, did not vote for the budget bill on Saturday. So I'm going to address the budget bill, what's in it, and the politics underneath. I'll try to get back to the race in New York City today. If not, I'll do it tomorrow. And I'll try to, if we have time, discuss the political implications for Democrats in the midterms with Tillis and Bacon bowing out. So, as you know, Saturday, the Senate held a key procedural vote on whether to proceed with the 2026 budget. That's why it's called a procedural vote. Should we proceed? I don't know if that's why they call it a procedural vote, but it's a good mnemonic to understand what a procedural vote is. So they voted to proceed with the 2026 budget bill in the Senate. It was a big vote on whether to bring one big, beautiful bill to the Senate floor for a debate, and then a final vote that they hope for some time before July 4th. On Saturday, the budget bill advanced by a vote of 51 to 49 in the Senate. The budget, again, has not passed in the Senate. Saturday's vote was whether to advance the bill for debate in the Senate on the budget and then vote on the budget. And then it goes into conference where the House and the Senate draft a finalized version of the budget bill, which is then taken up again by the House and Senate for a final vote. The Senate is passing this through reconciliation, a rule that makes it filibuster-proof so long as the bill is entirely budget-related. The parliamentarian of the Senate struck several provisions from the bill at the last minute. There was one provision removing a tax break on silencers. The Republicans, the pro-gun lobby, snuck in a provision in the budget bill that would have removed a tax on people who wanted to buy a silencer for their gun. The parliamentarian said that's not budget related. If you want to pass this through reconciliation, you have to remove this. Well, if it passes both chambers this week, Republicans plan to get it to Trump's desk before July 4th. Although over the weekend, Trump said he's not so concerned about hitting that July 4th deadline. They have until October 1st of this year to pass the 2026 budget. So it would be, just in terms of spin for the Republicans, it would be an accomplishment to just get a budget passed, no continuing resolutions, before October 1st. It would be, as cruel as it is, and I'm going to go over the cruelty in a second, as cruel as it is, if they get it signed by July 4th, it's a testament to how Donald Trump can crack skulls in the Republican Party and get things done for the richest 1%. So they, if they can get it passed before October 1st, they're trying for July 4th, and Trump can spin this pretty well. It will be perceived as a feather in his toupee, or whatever that is. It's going to be a feather in his whatever. It'll seem that way for low information Americans tricked into voting against their own interests. So July 4th is the deadline to pass this budget bill, but Trump isn't wedded to it. kind of like all his wives, kind of like the trade deals that he said had to be signed by next week. Remember the 90-day freeze on all those draconian tariffs? And he said they expire in mid-July, and by then I will have made deals with 200 separate countries. Well, he's no longer worried about that deadline to get 200 trade deals signed by mid-July. So far, not one trade deal. Although Canada, late Sunday, agreed to end its digital trade tax on U.S. internet companies, which on Friday, Trump just walked away from the negotiating table with Canada to protect Amazon. I think Canada just imposed what amounts, I think, to a digital sales tax on internet companies in America. Trump walked away, and late Sunday night, Canada said, okay, you win, Donald. We're getting rid of the digital tax. So he seems to have won, as of late Sunday night, a couple of $2 billion in tax savings for the people who really need it, America's internet companies. He's a real populist, isn't he? The dangerous thing is Trump can spin all of this to make it look like he's winning. The cruelty of these budget cuts, well, many of these cuts won't kick in strategically until after the midterms. So the procedural vote in the Senate on the budget bill passed 51 to 49. 51 to 49. Remember, the vice president, J.D. Vance, has the tie-breaking vote. So all it took was 2 more Republicans to vote against it. But the only other Republican to vote against the procedural bill was Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Just Tom Tillis in North Carolina and Rand Paul. These budget cuts, according to the Congressional Budget Office's final analysis of the procedural bill passed on Saturday, these budget cuts will throw 12 million Americans off Medicaid, not to mention the millions who will lose their Obamacare eligibility. It will also throw more than 2 million Americans off food stamps. It is the single largest cut to our social safety net in American history. That's according to Bobby Kogan, a senior policy analyst at the Center for American Progress, speaking with the Washington Post. According to this Senate bill, Medicaid spending will be cut by nearly 20%. Food stamps will be cut by nearly 15%. As I said at the top of the show, it's not just cruel and immoral. I have come to believe it's also voter suppression. How can you vote when you're starving or too sick? Lisa Murkowski, the Republican from Alaska who positions herself as a moderate, struck a late-night deal that makes her state, Alaska, immune from some of the proposed Medicaid cutbacks to rural hospitals. Murkowski also got a carve-out for Alaskans when it comes to work requirements for food stamps. So, typical Republican Lisa Murkowski basically said, I got mine. The rest of you can all go pound permafrost. I think that's what they say in Alaska. Instead of go pound sand, I think in Alaska they say go pound permafrost. Wisconsin Republican Ron Johnson voted against the bill because it would add $3.3 trillion to our debt. Even with these malignantly cruel cuts it's still going to add $3.3 trillion to our debt. So he voted again. He wanted more cruel. It wasn't cruel enough for Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who married into wealth. But then he switched his vote in favor of the bill after he was assured one of his amendments to address the debt would be taken up during this week's vote. Arama. Vote Arama is what they call it. They're just going to keep voting on amendments. In other words, he's going to end up voting for it. So the party that combats voter fraud, Ron Johnson on Saturday voted against the bill, and then he voted for it. He voted twice. He voted twice. That's voter fraud. Josh Hawley, speaking of frauds, the Republican senator from Missouri, who spent the past month screaming about Medicaid cuts, calling them a death tax, ended up voting for Saturday's bill, even though he promised his constituents he wouldn't vote for any budget that throws people off health care, health insurance, off Medicaid. But Josh Hawley said he ended up voting for it because he's now convinced, get this, that people won't be thrown off Medicaid immediately, which he claims will give him enough time to fight for their Medicaid. Sure he will. Sure he will. Susan Collins, the Republican from Maine, also voted to advance the budget bill. You might remember back in February 2020, during Trump's first impeachment, Senator Susan Collins defended her vote not to convict the president because she said, quote, with this impeachment, Trump had learned a pretty big lesson, unquote. That was in February of 2020. Trump learned a pretty big lesson. He sure did. He sure did. Did he ever? He learned a big lesson about politics and government and how it really works if you're willing to go there. As mentioned earlier, North Carolina Republican Senator Thom Tillis voted against the bill and then immediately announced he would not seek re-election next year. So both Republicans, Congressman Bacon and Senator Thom Tillis, and their families have been on the receiving end of death threats from MAGA supporters for publicly challenging Trump. And now, instead of staying to fight, they're walking away. The number of death threats against members of Congress has increased 1,000% since Donald Trump first took office back in 2017. Earlier this year, Rolling Stone magazine reported that North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis had the sister-in-law of Pete Hegseth sign an affidavit swearing not just to his alcoholism, but Hegseth's violence towards his ex-wife, how his ex-wife would call his sister-in-law saying, I'm hiding in the closet. He's doing it again. After securing her signed affidavit, according to several reports, Senator Thom Tillis decided not to introduce Hegseth's sister-in-law as a star witness during Hegseth's confirmation hearings. And then Senator Thom Tillis decided, you know what? I'm going to vote to confirm Pete Hegseth. Why did he vote to confirm Pete Hegseth? Why didn't he bring Hegseth's sister-in-law before the committee as a star witness? Well, according to several reports, there were way too many death threats made against Senator Thom Tillis and his family. Had Tillis voted no, the final tally would have been 51 against. Hegseth, a white Christian nationalist, covered in neo-Nazi tattoos, whose own mother put into writing that he was abusive towards women, Hegseth would not have become our nation's Secretary of Defense but for North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis. So yeah, Republican from Maine, Senator Susan Collins, you were absolutely correct back in 2020. Donald Trump learned his lesson. One of the most underreported stories of 2025 is how Donald Trump governs through death threats. On his very first day back in the Oval Office, he pardoned nearly 1,500 insurrectionists. He did that for a reason. He commuted some sentences, but mostly pardoned. Would you serve in Congress? Are you brave enough? Thom Tillis certainly isn't, and apparently neither is Don Bacon. Back in 2023, Don Bacon went against Trump by announcing he was on the fence when it came to giving Jim Jordan his vote for Speaker. Jordan, of course, the star of the new HBO documentary Surviving Ohio State, which I highly recommend. Whenever you want to protest Jim Jordan, just hold up a sign that says, "That's just Strauss." Just hold those up wherever Jim Jordan is speaking. Just hold up a sign that says, "That's just Strauss." So the death threats for opposing Jim Jordan, who was endorsed by Donald Trump, grew so intense that Congressman Bacon, a retired United States Air Force Brigadier General, that's him, with all his medals, General Bacon decided he and his wife needed to sleep with guns by their pillows. And now, a retired United States Air Force Brigadier General Don Bacon, when he has a chance to fight for his country and party, throws up the white flag of surrender and says, "I'm out of here." Reminds me of former House Republican from Colorado, Ken Buck, who was a prosecutor with the U.S. Department of Justice before turning to politics. Big, tough prosecutor, U.S. prosecutor. Ran the U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado, and then he ran for Congress. He's Mr. Law and Order. And he stood up, to his credit, to the pro-Putin wing in his Republican Party, and he also stood up, to his credit, to the election deniers in the Republican Party. Back in 2023, he refused to vote for Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan for Speaker because they both refused to say Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election. Republican Ken Buck, a former prosecutor, a man who puts people behind bars, then a congressman, said, "I refuse to support anyone in my party who couldn't bring themselves to say Donald Trump lost." And then he voted for Mike Johnson for Speaker, the single biggest election denier in Congress. Mike Johnson, the so-called constitutional scholar, convinced nearly 100 Republicans to sign his amicus brief back in 2020 in support of a lawsuit before the Supreme Court challenging the election results in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Mike Johnson, the constitutional scholar, claims to have written this amicus brief. Liz Cheney, a lawyer, read Johnson's amicus brief. She said he asked her to sign it, so she read it. Unlike every other Republican who just put their name to it, she said after reading it, she said it was so poorly reasoned, she seriously questioned whether he actually attended law school. That'd be Mike Johnson. She wasn't sure he actually attended law school. That amicus brief was written so poorly. Yet, former prosecutor Ken Buck, the moderate Republican, voted for Johnson, of all people, for Speaker on October 25th, 2023, and then a week later announced he was quitting Congress. By March of 2024, he was gone, right after signing Joe Biden's Ukraine supplemental. And you know who has his seat now? Okay, little dramatic, maybe. That would be Lauren Boebert. She couldn't win, you might remember, her own district, and got herself elected. She moved as Buck's replacement. So, as I keep telling you, with the Republicans, with even just a modicum of decency, the Republicans with just a modicum of decency, when they quit, we end up with people who are worse. Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to do another show tomorrow. I have some nasty artificial intelligence that I'm not sure I made this with a photograph. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, I did some Photoshop and then I put it into this artificial intelligence program. I don't know. I don't know if this is legal. It shouldn't be. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's artificial intelligence, okay? Her trying to escape from the loony bin. I mean, look at this. Look how dangerous this is. That is artificial intelligence, okay? That is not real. I mean, it should be real. She should be, but that is, this is real. This is Donald Trump picking his nose. No, it's not. It's not. It's just, I don't know what to do. I mean, this is Donald Trump. I got a picture and I altered it just a little. Then I put it into, there's one I'm afraid to show. Here he is picking his nose so badly, and then he eats the boogers. He's eating. I shouldn't be doing this. This is why I'm wearing a blazer, to look more respectable. I said, you better put a blazer on. You're losing all your credibility because this is all I care about. This is what you can do now with, okay, and this is Jeff Bezos. Here he is at his wedding eating gold coins. I mean, that's a photograph. What the hell is happening that you can do that with a photograph now? I mean, I spent years learning to draw, learning animation, and I'm horrible at it. And now you can just take a picture, and I don't know if I should show this. I was told not to. I'm going to show 3 seconds of it. I don't know. I'm wearing a blazer, so. All right. That was Lauren Sanchez and Jeff Bezos. And they're, oh, God. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I'm going to be doing a lot of shows this week. We got a big budget coming up. I'm going to explain the last tranche of Supreme Court rulings and all that kind of, and we're going to be talking a lot about the mayoral race. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. If I made a mistake, let me know. Again, that was artificial intelligence. This is not real. I mean, this is... So, if you work in Hollywood, I don't see how they're going to be studios. I don't see how they're going to have... how they're going to, I mean, everything, I mean, if you can do this, what I'm doing right now, if you, you know what they're going to always need in Hollywood? Yes men. That's what I would teach. If you're young, learn how to say, oh my God, that's brilliant. They're always going to need people like that. If you want to work in Hollywood, learn to be a yes man. I mean, look at, I mean, just, and this. Hey, I'm wearing a blazer, okay? Goodbye. I'm doing another show tomorrow. Thank you for watching.